Good evening. Welcome to Instructional Design from the Ground Up, live on Tuesdays. And we are going to have a great show tonight. You can see Dennise up there. We had the Brady Bunch camera shot tonight. Dennise top left and Dr. Miko over there. He's got the big screen tonight because he's going to be taking the lead on what I think people are going to find is an incredible topic. And we know there's a bunch of you out there in the chat room, so start chatting it up and throw those questions in and comments and everything else. So, what I'm going to do, Dr. Miko, I think you should start this off and give us kind of a background on the topic tonight.
Oh wow, what a major way to start. Well, thank you so much. This is the fourth time that we are doing this together. I'm glad that you guys asked me to come back. That's really fun to not only to chat with you about all of these topics, but also to interact with the people who have been joining the sessions and also watching afterwards the recordings. So wow, disruptive pedagogy. So let me tell you something. The first thing that I always try to, when people tell me, oh, I'm into disruptive pedagogy, is trying to find out what they mean.
Yeah.
Because I don't think everybody has the same definitions for disruptive. And I guess that's been disruptive. So probably there's nothing wrong
It
with
fits the
that.
definition.
Yeah,
So, just the
exactly.
fact that you have it is disruptive enough, right?
Exactly.
I think that's a great way to start because, gosh,
Yeah,
I mean, we're going to be all over the place on this, but I think you're exactly
absolutely.
right.
And I think when you do some research and you read articles, not everybody defines disruptive pedagogy the same. You will see some people doing some studies saying that bringing technology to the classroom is disruptive.
Yep.
Some people will say moving from the lecture to more active learning strategies is disruptive. And
Yep.
some other people are calling what we know as critical pedagogy disruptive,
Yeah.
which are people who are thinking that the learner in the current structures are oppressed and that we have to change what we know about education and the systems to
Mm-hmm.
be able to free the oppressed. So as you
Yep.
can see, we have three different ways as defining a disruptive pedagogy. And obviously you will see why I have my points of view about disruptive pedagogy, but in my opinion, it has to come to a balance, and we will talk about that balance. So I believe, like with everything, picking a whole side and ignoring the other is not positive. I think you have to find a balance, a middle ground, a spot where you take into account all of this, not only what we know about instruction, but also the part that is disruptive, and of course, the learner.
Now,
Well, I think,
I was going to
yeah,
say, I'm going to come at you from a novice. I have, before two
hardly.
weeks ago, I did not know really what disruptive pedagogy was, and I could barely pronounce pedagogy. I had to practice that a few times because it's a tongue twister for me, honestly.
Well, you could say pedagogy too. That's what
That's why I
just
started, and
depends
I'm like, I
on.
think it's pedagogy.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway, I'm going to come at it. I'm going to come at you with some questions because this is all new to me. And I'm sure that there are
Sure.
going to be some viewers out there who are new to ISD who aren't sure what it really is either. And so you had first brought up the idea of bringing disruptive technology, just bringing new technology into a classroom could be disruptive. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What does that mean? Just bringing technology in general into the classroom is considered disruptive to instruction?
Yes, I think so. When you want to have a traditional kind of instruction, what do you think about? You think the instructor with PowerPoint, with a lecture, delivering the content to the learners listening, taking notes, then having to take a test. I think one thing that all we can agree about is that that's what is traditional instruction, so to speak. Let's say that I decided for a whole week we want to play a game because that game is really connected to the topic of the class. It's disruptive because I have to do different lesson plans. It's disruptive because I'm not going to be an instructor, but a facilitator or probably a coach. So it's not that I'm irrelevant, but my role in the classroom is going to change. It's disruptive because now the students have to spend more time collaborating than before. Disruptive because now they have to spend some time learning how to play the game, and of course, disruptive because the evidence of mastery of content and knowledge is different. It's not a grade, it's not points on a test, but it's maybe looking at the data log or the sheet or the rewards the whole performance that they had during the game. And I bring games because that's usually what people know me from, my research. But the same is true with many other types of instructional technologies and strategies. Bringing all of this doesn't mean that we are not teaching traditionally. It doesn't mean that we have to forget about instructional design or cognition. It just means that you have to take into account the presence of that technology and how that's going to change your ecosystem, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think when we talk about disruptive anything, we have to put it in the context of where we started and then where we moved to. Because you can take any educational setting, any training setting, anything where you're trying to do learning transfer. And if you start in one context and one foundational point and go to another, which is different, people would argue that that's disruptive. And I think it's all about the context of it, where you start to where you're going to go. So there was this whole notion when we first did things online that you alluded to that, wow, this is disruptive, this isn't going to work. And gee whiz, the last 2 years, everybody's been in disruptive, right? I mean, let's be honest about it. The people that hadn't already gone there had to go there for the most part. And that was disruptive. And that's the word you hear many times when you hear people talk about this transition like you did in 10 days there, and others have had to do over periods of months and years. And that was disruptive. But you have to think about, what does that mean? So when I look at anything, I look at the end user. All I really care about is the learner. I don't care at all if it's disruptive to a facilitator. I don't care if it's disruptive to a system. What I care about is this in the best interest of the learner. And there are times, and we talk about this in learning styles, the silliness that learning styles is, this whole notion that you want to challenge learners. And I think when there is planned disruptive technologies or other ways to manifest learning transfer, and I think when it's well designed using instructional design and people that actually know what they're doing, I think you have there the birthplace of something innovative and something that works best for the learner. And I don't know if you agree with that, but to me, this is all contextual.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I think the learner, it's the one that we have to focus on when we're thinking about disruption. Because even if you think you're being traditional, you're going to be going through periods in your instruction in which you have to be disruptive. That's the nature of the work. Your population changes. By default, you are going to feel that that was disruptive for you. But you're completely right. It's on the learner. It's the learner going through that disruption. And if the disruption is beneficial for the learner. And I have a lot of things to say about that, because the problem with this new wave of disruptive is that people are forcing active learning to the point that they just have busy work and activities for the sake of. And they basically have criminalized and they have put this bad label on lecturing. Like, God forbid you tell these people that you're going to lecture. There is still value in the lecture as an instructional strategy. It's just the problem is not the lecture. The problem at times is the lecturer, because it's on you to engage in.
Don't say it. Don't tell me that we have people that just show PowerPoints and everybody's got to wake up in 2 hours and 29 minutes so they can leave the classroom. Say it isn't so, Miko.
Well, I'm being honest, and I think it's that combination. You can lecture for 15 minutes. Based on that, you can have an active learning activity for the students to get to practice that. You can then show some examples. You can show a prototype. You can have a mix of instructional strategies. Saying that one is better than the other for all contexts is problematic, in my opinion. And I think that's the problem with some people who are supporting a new definition of disruptive pedagogy, because they want to ban all we know about cognition and these traditional methods that we know that with the right instructional design, they're very effective.
They're very effective. And I think this brings a point too about especially adult learners, but in a K-12 environment too, whether you're Montessori or wherever you go with that, people only have so much attention span. And adults notoriously, if you get past 12 minutes with an adult and you haven't had them interact in some way, they're gone. And children, I think the last I saw was like 6, 7 minutes. And the younger they are, the shorter that time span gets. And don't quote me on that. I'm not an expert in that part of it. But I just, the whole notion of trying to tag any instructional strategy as being wrong is wrong, because it's all about the design. And that's the point of this channel. And what we do as professionals in instructional design is we take any mix of population, content, and expected outcome and make it successful, because we marry those things together in a way that works for the learner. And I think you're exactly right. If you tag anything, or you try to say, well, lecture is no good, or this is no good, or I can go back and everything we've ever used in learning transfer, somebody has said was no good. And they were really wrong, because it's not about what you use, it's how you design it.
Exactly. That's completely accurate. And Dennise, let me ask you something. What was the last movie you watched that you really enjoy and you watched the whole thing? If you remember, if you're into watching movies, I don't know if you maybe are.
I watched a movie this weekend. Do you know? I don't remember what it was. That's where my brain is.
Oh wow!
I have my fallbacks though. Like I love The Shawshank Redemption. Would that help you?
Okay. Yeah. So how long is an episode? How long?
Oh, The Shawshank Redemption is a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
In Ohio, right?
It's a movie. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have any problems following during those 3 hours?
Absolutely not. I have watched this movie over 20 times, and each time I watch it because I want to learn something new from it, because it's amazingly written. I mean, Stephen King. Come on.
Yeah.
But it's just amazing. So I'm looking at it from a learner point of view, and I am looking for those learning moments. But at the same time, I am so fully engaged in this. I could watch it probably 300 times and I'm still going to be engaged.
See, you just answered and basically made a point. You illustrated a point that I'm going to make. If you are engaged and if you see value in the content, you can see 3 hours.
Value.
People see through. Yeah, people watch, soccer matches, baseball, basketball, movies. They go to concerts. Like, if you're interested, if it's engaging, if there is something that makes you wow, cry, smile, feel emotions, if you see value in instruction and you connect with that content, you don't have necessarily problems that after 10 minutes you're going to disconnect yourself from. And I think that's a lesson that we have to bring to the classroom. How can I make my experience as engaging as a movie? Yeah. And I'm not going to say it's easy, but that's why you have to rely on a mix of instructional methods. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to lecture because there are things that you have to know on the spot. Can you imagine a medical doctor having to go through notes to see, let me remember, where's the heart? Or imagine me teaching a class.
If you run into that particular practicing physician, will you send me an email? I'd prefer to have one of those body parts, but that's me. But you make an excellent point here, Miko, because what part of our job is at least subliminally entertainment, in the sense that we need to keep people engaged. Engagement, when you're talking about movies or anything that you would do outside of a professional environment, is no different than engagement in a classroom or in a course online. And
absolutely,
it would seem to me that where designers miss a lot of what we're talking about is when you get caught in these old school approaches to everything, and you look at what's I can't believe what I used to see in classrooms. It was, I don't know, Night of the Living Dead or something. It was no form of education. And hello, Mona. Yeah. Well, engaging and entertaining. Way to go,
I would
Mona.
say that, Miko, you hit the nail on the head when you said value. That right there, it can be engaging till we're blue in the face. It has to have value. I mean, for me as a learner, I need to know that what I'm paying attention to, I'm going to be able to use in my life, my work life, my family life, whatever it might be. And I think that especially adult learners, I think we are so strapped for time that we don't have time to waste. We don't want to waste our time. We want to learn something. We want to learn something of value. So if somebody is lecturing for 3 hours on something, but I'm going to walk away from that with great value, and they've kept me engaged because that content has value for what I am trying to do, what I'm trying to accomplish as a learner, then I'll stick it through. I've watched videos that were 30 seconds long and I was ready to pull my hair out of my head, because they just were so they didn't add any value to my life. So, I mean, it really is about value.
And that's also, you're a professional videographer.
Well, true.
So there are things that I do professionally.
Yeah, your standards are high too.
Yeah, I mean, I can't watch police shows because it's just laughable because it's so far from reality. And I've got an idea. Mona's on there. I don't know who else is on there with us right now. Why don't you put in chat what you find most engaging and rewarding in the classroom? How do you want to learn? What are the kind of things that Miko's talking about, Dennise is talking about? What are the things that you remember, courses you took in the last couple years or whenever you took them? What was that thing that said, wow, I learned something today. I engaged with this. I took something from this. And what was the vehicle of that engagement?
Yeah, well,
and while people are doing that, how many times have you attended a session? Let's say that you pay for attending a training session and you go in and these disruptive people, the excessive ones, they start with a think, pair, share. No, pair, think, share. Yeah. You pair, you think, you share. Yeah. Or they start with a trivia, like, can everybody tell me what's your favorite meal or something like that? And then 20 minutes have passed.
Don't get me started on icebreakers. I hate icebreakers. I would fire anybody that put an icebreaker in a course because I don't care that I'm an eagle. Okay, that's my bird. I'm an eagle.
Exactly, or what you like to eat. That's a conversation for somewhere else.
Yeah, do it at lunch, and I don't care that I want to be a mongoose. Okay, I mean, what has this got to do with the topic? And
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But in this spirit of being disruptive, and that's the message that I want to send today. Let's be careful with being so disruptive to the point that we are doing things that don't add value to the learner, because I'm very into the evaluation. So when I do training or teaching, I'm always looking at the comments. And in one occasion, I had to share the stage with other trainers, and I was cutting to the chase. I went to the point because that's my style. And one of the things that people mentioned, several people, was like, we spent 30 minutes just in introductions with the persons who did that. 30 minutes just knowing things that at the end, but in the mind of these disruptive people, that's what engages the learner. That's what makes active learning happen. That's how you build a community. And I'm not saying that you don't have to build a community. I'm saying that you have to find a more effective way of doing that. Maybe
the
put them together.
The community is not about the individuals, and that's where this falls off the track. Anybody who's designed a course for me knows when you get to the lesson plan, whether you use the 9 events or whatever, everything takes place before you start the content. So if the vice president wants to come in and make a fool of himself, and you're going to talk about where the bathrooms are and the rest of it, so you really have to be careful with that.
Now, Mona is asking, and this was my question a while back too, to Chuck, when we were talking about icebreakers, and he was like, no. What if icebreakers are relevant and ease the learning environment? Because that was my question too, is, well, don't we want to get comfortable? Don't we want to make the learners feel comfortable so that they can engage and they feel open to be able to, and safe to be able to, Chuck just disappeared, so we'll get him back, and to be safe to be able to engage and interact in the class. So what do you have to say about that, Miko?
Well, I will say that, again, it's not to the extreme that I'm going to say never use an icebreaker. Of course, you should, you can. It depends on the context. If these people are going to spend, let's say, 8 hours of training with me, I think an icebreaker will be good because you get to know each other. You're going to spend with them 8 hours. But if I only have 1 hour for presentation, why would I create an activity that will cut my time to 30 minutes when I have to deliver more important content? That's number one. Number two, not everybody's into icebreakers. So you thinking that you're going to ease the environment, you might create stress because some people are like, oh my God, I have to talk now, or I have to come up with a creative answer because if I say something stupid, they're going to judge me. So those things can be counterproductive. So I say, yes, see how the icebreaker connects and is relevant to the topic. Pick an icebreaker that connects to your overall goals, to the content. For instance, let's say that I'm doing a compliance training. An icebreaker can be, can you tell me an instance in which you have seen this law or this statement being violated or something like that? That allows for everybody to participate, start that thought-provoking process, but it's connected to the topic.
It's connected to the topic.
If we start talking about food or traveling or animals, That I will do if I have a week with those people, or 8 hours, something like that, because you
Mm-hmm.
want to get to know them at the personal level if you're going to stay that long with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Chuck, by the way, his internet just died. He just sent me a message. So it's us for
Oh
until his
no.
internet comes back up. So we'll see.
Oh.
But, that brings me to something that I learned very recently. I designed and I facilitated my first class a couple weeks back in October. And I originally, of course, Chuck's my mentor, so I ran the design plan through him, the lesson plan, and there was an icebreaker in there, and he's like, "Oh, you know how I feel about icebreakers," but what he taught me with that was to tie it exactly what you said, to tie it to the learning objectives of the course and make it relevant to that so that we can build off of that. It's more like part of the actual lesson going on and what's being taught. So it's part icebreaker in a way. It was designed to be able to get people comfortable talking in a Zoom environment, but it also served the purpose of it was tied directly to the learning objectives. And so that was the critical piece that I was missing originally, that Chuck helped me to understand.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I know that Joe has very, very specific views about the icebreaker, but you can do other things. You can gamify the experience a little. There's a tool that I use a lot, and I think I have mentioned that in other sessions. I use
Mm-hmm.
Mentimeter a lot. And with Mentimeter, one of the things that let's say I'm teaching about ePortfolios, I can start a session by, hey, let's create a word cloud, use your phone, and I want you to tell me what's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say ePortfolios. And the whole list of participants are typing, and as they're typing and submitting, the word cloud forms
Yes.
before before their eyes, and they get to see what other people are saying. It's not a formal activity, but it's connected. And I mention the words and I make connections to, okay, yeah, this is accurate for an e-portfolio. Or you can do a little contest. Let's say that you assign people to read some preparation materials or to read chapter 3 before coming to class. You can start with a little contest and say, hey, I'm going to ask a couple questions about the content. And you get not only to see if people were prepared or not, but that's a fun activity for people to start easing into the learning environment without feeling that they're wasting their time.
Yeah, that's the most important thing, is you don't want to waste your time. And that's Chuck's biggest lesson. That's my biggest takeaway from
Don't waste a second.
don't
And I
waste a
think I would
second.
call that gaining attention and not an icebreaker,
Yeah,
to
gaining
be
Fair
attention.
enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Danish,
yeah.
Hmm.
because it relates to the whole point of what you're trying to accomplish, right? And I
Hmm.
think it's where icebreakers, as traditionally defined, where you just pick your animal or your bird, um,
Mhm.
has nothing to do with the content whatsoever. So that, to me, if you're going to do it before you start the course. Do
Hmm.
it, right after you take attendance and whatever else you're going to do. And if
Mhm.
it doesn't create community, to me, it creates diversion, because you want learners to focus from the first second you start on that content, on those objectives. And if you can do that with a game and gaining attention, or even do that in recall, I think that's terrific. And I would support that 1,000%.
Hmm.
But where it goes off the rail, and once again, we get back to this context thing, right? Chuck's going to talk about context again, but he is, because I really think that's what this is all about. If the focus is on the learner, the context is on how to build the scaffolding to get your content from what you've got as a facilitator and designer to what the learner needs to put in long-term memory. I mean, that's the science of
Mhm.
it. And anything that
Yeah.
you do is disruptive from A to Z is not helpful. And if you're going to do the silliness, do it early and then start on what you're going to do. But that's Chuck.
No, but that's accurate. And actually, this new wave of disruptive pedagogy that we have to be careful about is that some people don't believe in learning objectives, and they see learning objectives as a bunch of words, a formality. But a learning objective, a set of learning objectives, is an agreement, it's a commitment, it's a promise that you have to the learner. By the end of my class, you should be able
Exactly.
to develop a learning game. And every single thing that I do over those 15 weeks, you have to see, okay, this is going to help me to achieve that end goal. You
Yeah.
will be able to monitor yourself. Halfway there, I'm like, I don't think I'm ready to develop this game. So it's not a formality, it's a promise, it's a commitment, and it's a tool for the learner to know where they are in the course, how far they are from mastery, and the things that that needs to happen before getting to the end point. So they're very
Yeah.
important. They're just not words.
Well, you have to have them too, and that's the other part of this. In higher education, especially, all the regional accrediting bodies, my work is with middle states, but wherever you happen to be in the country, they are now demanding that you show that learners can reach mastery, that you have observable, measurable objectives, that you have tangible evaluation tasks that will determine mastery based on those objectives. And if you want to sit around in a circle and count fingers as a group, that's not a class anymore. And if you want to do those things, that's fine. Do them as an auxiliary to what you're doing in the classroom or what you're trying to accomplish. But hardcore academic work now, governed by regional accrediting bodies, is pretty closely defined now. You need objectives, you need evaluation tests. And I know for a fact that colleges and universities that had the more open approach to this of just attendance, and even organizations that had no grades, it was pass or fail, those were quickly brought into the family of regional accreditation and saying, no, you need to show in most of your, if not all of your courses, that you have moved a learner from where they came from to the point of reaching mastery for the objectives of that course. That's not negotiable. I mean, there are exceptions, and I'm not going to talk about outliers. One course out of 100 that doesn't do that, that's fine. Whatever. But just in the mainstream of it, this whole notion of just getting people together is enough. That's not the way it works.
So in the
And that's
world
one of the problems.
in the world of disruptive
Yeah.
pedagogy, is this considered one of these disruptive learning strategies? Is not using objectives? Like, we're going to just throw those
Yes.
out. That's actually, yeah, I would be
Yes.
I would be
And this is
completely against that.
that's not something that somebody told me. That's not. I have witnessed it firsthand that with this new wave of disruptive pedagogy, they don't want to have learning objectives. They don't want to have a syllabus like week by week because they believe, some people, that you have to be that fluid. And let me talk about what Chuck just mentioned with the grades. They don't place a lot of value in the grades, and I understand the angle, and we can have a debate back and forth of why grades are important or not. But sometimes people forget about something. We're still in an educational system in which your grades are important. You need a good grade to be keeping that scholarship. You need a good GPA to be admitted to grad school. You need a grade for many things. So what do you think is going to happen if you don't give a grade, or you just do activities throughout the whole semester, and at the end, the students just get to the grade book and see what you gave them without any opportunities of beforehand knowing how they were doing? When I was involved in a class like that, I really don't want to get too into the details, but the students, I was an assistant to the class, and the students were anxious. They were trying to get from me information what was going on, because not having grades, not having feedback, just because they didn't want to get into that creativity and they were wanting to be disruptive, everybody was anxious and freaking out because they didn't learn until the very end the grade, and it was a surprise.
The
Well,
creativity.
So,
See, but
and
this
that's
is,
called disruptive. So we
yeah,
have to be
well,
careful. We have to be
I
careful.
got disruptive when it comes to faculty like that too. I think it'd be disruptive if they stay at home and let the rest of us do this. I mean, there are always exceptions to these things, and I'm fine with that. But this goes back. I mean, you can go back. How far do you want to go back with this whole disruptive notions? Um, if you don't have objectives, and this is the point of this, they don't have to be formal objectives. They don't have to be written in 4 parts or 5 parts. The point is that you've created a roadmap for learners. That's what objectives are. However you decide to do that, be creative, be disruptive, you know, be the outlier, be the strong person who's going to change the system, and let me know how that goes in about 30 years. The whole notion of objectives is creating the roadmap, creating the path for people to have learning transfer. And if you do that informally, if you write them in a way that they don't even sound like objectives, which good designers can do, this whole thing really works. Let's see, there's no accountability. Exactly. I mean, if you
Yeah.
don't have accountability, I agree, Kathy. If you don't have accountability, I mean, there's parts of this, and there are portions of things that we take and we engage in that it's not important to do that. I will stipulate that in my court of law here on Tuesday evenings that it's okay to not do it all the time. But the notion is that 99% of what we do, you have to have this. You've got to have
Yeah.
this framework. You've got to have this roadmap. You have to have some accountability for the investment that people make in these courses. And whether that's an investment of time or money or anything else, there's lots of room for creativity. And a good
Yes.
instructional designer can find ways to harness that creativity, write objectives around it. And the examples I always use is art appreciation. Everybody tells me you can't write objectives for art appreciation. Well, yeah, you can. Have people participate. That's an objective. Have them express an opinion. Have them choose their
Yes.
favorite artist. There's all kind of ways you can write objectives for any content area. And I always have had a challenge in the last 30 years. If you can find a content area that I can't write an objective for, you got dinner on me. And right now, that money's pretty safe in that envelope because a good instructional designer, and not that I'm a good instructional designer, but anybody that's done this for a while can write an objective in any content area and make it something that
Absolutely.
can be observed and measured, and you can find out if people reach mastery. And I'll put that challenge out to anybody that's watching this tonight. Send me a content area, and if I can't write an objective, dinner's on me.
Ooh,
Okay.
challenge. People
Wow.
challenge. Take them up on it.
But I
Except
think that's an
except
excellent,
Mona,
that's an
because she will
excellent
do
point.
it. But I mean,
I will give
okay,
it some
so
thought. I will
Mika,
give it
think
some
about
thought.
this. And Dennise, I mean, we've all been on the receiving end of awful. And that taught me more lessons about being a good instructional designer than some of the things that I felt I did well. There's one or two things I felt I did well. So I think this is where we get pushed back in instructional design just in general, is it's too formal, it's too much of a process. You don't need to do that if you're a smart facilitator and teacher. You can work a population in a classroom through blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, that's fine if all you do is teach one course with one group of people. But my friends, professional instructional designers, design thousands of courses. And some of these courses are for hundreds and tens of hundreds and thousands. The largest population I ever had was 3 million people. Now, you tell me how I am going to be in every one of those classrooms and be engaged with every one of those learners and make that work without a plan, without objectives, without a design, without a lesson. You tell me how I'm going to do that. And this is where it falls apart when you have this discussion, is that we work at scale. Whether we do one course or whether we do 1,000 courses, that is our mentality about this. So the standalone classroom teacher, if you can pull this off, congratulations and have at it. But most of us as professional designers don't have the luxury of that scale. We have scales of tens and thousands and more.
And not only that, but to add to that, one thing that you taught me, Chuck, was that when we are designing, developing a course, we have to put our learner hat off and we have to put our facilitator hat off and design the course. We're designing the course to be scalable. We're not designing it to be the facilitator of that course. We may never see that course to fruition as a facilitator. And we may never take that course. That's not something we would be taking as a learner. So something that we have to keep in mind is that we are developing and designing these courses for most likely for other people to teach and to take this over and do something with it.
Yeah, and I think that's the point when you talk about, hi Jay, by the way, what you have to think about, and here's where I think there's a complete misunderstanding about what we do as instructional designers and professionals in this field, is this whole notion of what we actually do. And I think that many people look at this and who are teachers or trainers and they have small groups that they work with, they do a course for a community group, or they're in a college situation and they do this or that. And that's part of what we do, but that's a small part of what we do. Professional designers work at scale. And it's just hard to imagine. It's just like, okay, well, I'm going to make one pot and sell it at the flea market. Well, no, you're going to make 100,000 pots and sell them all across the world. And it's that kind of scalability that we look at every day as professionals. So imagine someone who is working at Apple or Microsoft or working for the government, putting together courses for any of these really large groups of learners. And you will never be in that classroom. You will never teach that course. You will never meet those learners. Your course is produced, it's piloted, it's put into a package, and it's sent out. And when you're done, you fix it when it comes back if there's problems. And I think this is where it falls apart for a lot of people that don't truly understand what we do. And Miko, I don't know if you get the same thing, but sometimes I just think people don't appreciate the scale of what we do.
I don't think there's an understanding, and that's something that I try to do through training and mentoring new people to the field, and even people who are working with me at other capacities, trying to explain what an instructional designer is able to do and the relevance of the field. And I'm going to give you an example, talking about the disruptive pedagogy thing again. A good instructional designer should be able to use a mix of instructional methods and knowing which one is appropriate to that context or to that experience. Going back to the example of the heart, for a medical doctor, you need to know accurate 100% where every body part is. There is no room for interpretation, for constructivism. That's not something that I want my classmates to discuss with me. And then at the end, we come to a conclusion. That's a very important piece of information for my career and my development, that in those instances, I really want to rely on the expert, the professor, to deliver that content to me. And then after that, I get hands-on and all of that. But I need 100% the information that is accurate. There should be no room for misconceptions there. And again, in this disruptive pedagogy thing, that people in critical pedagogy, they say that when you teach like that, you are oppressing. That's exactly what the work of.
Well, this goes back. I could tell you where this goes back to. It goes back to Brazil, and in the 1930s and 1940s with Freire, who I studied for a long time, and I've brought his work up in class many times because it's an interesting approach. But you have to look at, again, the context of what he was doing and the population he was working with. And we were talking about life and death issues, and education was more generally assumed to be how you went within society to be successful and sometimes just be able to stay alive. And we're talking about a completely different contextual pattern here. And I think you just have to look at all of this and, disruptive. Okay, try doing disruptive when you have to deliver this to 10,000 people in 50 states. Tell me how you're going to take this disruptive out there and scale it and then hope to ever have any success with it. You're not going to be able to do it, I can assure you. And I think if you want to do it in one-offs or in smaller populations that you're very well attuned with and that you have a different relationship with, I think that's wonderful. You should go do that. But that's not what we do, most of us. Most of us have very large things that we do.
Yeah.
And Mona, in terms of what instructional design needs in the 21st century, ATD's got some statistics out there. I've heard different numbers. But I would say, just conservatively, there's probably in the neighborhood of 100,000 instructional designers across the country. And I think what you can do to tell how big this field is becoming, and I think it's exponentially growing, is to go to any of the big job sites, either go on LinkedIn or name the top 10 and put in instructional designer and see how many jobs pop up. And then put in some of the other titles of some of the programs who thought they were going to be cute and rename their programs and do different things. And then you put in that title and you get zero. I mean, this is about instructional design. This is about what this field is, what it's done for, what it has a history of since the 1940s, and certainly since 1968 at UMBC and 74 at Florida State and on and on and on. Everybody wants to go off and do something different. And my friends, it's instructional design. It's ISD. If you don't like it, that's fine. Call it SAM. I don't care. Call it anything you want to, but it's still the same stuff. And we need to be okay with that and get beyond this discussion and just go out and design terrific courses.
You're right, that is the same. I think that nowadays we have found, number one, trendy words, buzzwords, and we have also found more people interested in studying those trendy words. That's why we feel in a way that all of this is brand new. But the other day I was talking to a colleague. She was asking me about gamification, and I say, when your teacher back in the day said everybody here has 100 points for attendance, every time that you miss class, you're gonna lose 5 points of those 100 points. That's gamification right there. You're applying negative feedback.
Yep.
It's just like back then, people didn't call that gamification. When your instructor asks you to complete a homework or read a chapter, which has happened through history, that's a way of flipping the classroom. It's just like nowadays the word became, but that's a way of flipping the classroom. So that's why there is another problem with this disruptive thing. They think that it's not based on what we know about instructional design, but it's the same thing. It's just like now the presence of technology also changes the face in which these instructional strategies are used. I give you that. That technology changes the face in a way. There are other considerations, but if you see, it is connected to instructional design principles and theories.
Well, and I think there's another part to this. Jelaine, hello. Yes, human resources, a lot of times instructional design and training design is under HR. That's a very common thing. And we are all sisters and brothers in that regard. So I see very little difference. I think we're all in the same family. Maybe you don't agree, but I do. And the other thing, when you're talking about this, Miko, this whole thing of disruptive, the notion that somehow the only thing that changes is how you have your methods or something else is just ludicrous. Students are changing. Learners are changing. And to continue to try to manifest any learning transfer using something from the 30s or the 50s or even the 70s, to me, is derelict. And so you want to be disruptive, be disruptive in a way that matches your population. So tell me a 10-year-old that's not on a smartphone. I dare you. Tell me one that's not on the internet. I dare you. Tell me one that's not familiar with the things we talk about when we talk about technology and learning transfer. So if you want to go backwards and live in a cave and continue to do things that way, that's disruptive. That to me is more disruptive than trying to do something that matches your learner with your opportunities for learning transfer with technology or whatever you use. So I think when you have a simplistic approach to anything, you leave out all of the different things that play into this equation. Learners are changing, my friends. They're changing every time a new technology or a new app comes out. And if designers aren't on top of it and aren't keeping up with it, that's disruptive, because that's going to stand in the way of learning transfer.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the word disruptive is inherently negative. Like when I think of disruptive, I just think that's a negative word. And with this conversation, it's telling me that it doesn't have to necessarily be a negative. And in terms of what you just said, Chuck, it's disruptive when you don't do certain things, when you don't evolve with the times. And so to add this, what's known as disruptive technology into a classroom isn't necessarily being disruptive in my mind from what I'm hearing. It's more, if you don't add it, it's being disruptive.
Well, I mean, I honestly believe it. Miko, I don't know about you. And Jelaine, I agree with you. Make it to assistant vice provost without being on the tenure track. Yeah. I mean, I think, don't get me started on tenure. We'll be here till sometime after Thanksgiving. Because my friend's tenure came out of the 20s when we had First Amendment issues in higher education. It has nothing to do with what it's evolved to. Chuck's opinion. But yes, you can and you should be able to. I think talent should win out, and that's the way that should be. But that's time for another discussion. But, Miko, what do you think about this whole notion of disruptive staying the same?
No, I completely agree with you. We have to embrace the reality of the new learner. We have to embrace the reality of how people get information. Sometimes we forget that the way people get information nowadays is different. It's easier, it's faster, it's free now to get information. So why not use those things for your class. I don't think those things are going to work against your class. Again, it's every design, the way you design the class. You can learn how to use the technology in such a way that it facilitates and enhances the experience. And when we use a good instructional designer, when we decide to use a technology, it's not for the sake of picking something fancy or trendy. It has to be something that meets the needs of the learners, and it's also something that the learners, you take advantage of the fact that they know how to use it, that they're using it. That's why digital game-based learning has become quite popular, because there's a billionaire industry for gaming. That's a reality that we will never be able to change. People spend a lot of time and they get engaged with games. So why not designing instruction around these learning games to enhance it? That's a way of disruption, but it works because, again, it connects to that design of that instructional experience.
See, now I
So
think
it's,
I wouldn't call it disruptive though, and maybe we're just maybe we're just tossing words around, but it seems to
yeah.
me that any instructional designer is disruptive when they don't have the best designed course, when they don't make the best match between content, learner, and outcomes. That to me is disruptive. And I think if you want to be clever and call this other stuff disruptive, okay, you know, that's fine. We'll sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk about it. But I think and not even disruptive, it's inefficient. It's a waste of resources. It's a waste of your learner's time. It's a waste of your facilitator's time and whoever's sponsoring or paying for this, whether it's academia or private industry. It's all the same. To me, it's goes back to the arguments I used to have in the 80s and 90s about constructivism and this whole notion of we didn't need objectives and we didn't need all this stuff. And how much talk do you hear about that these days?
It's it's almost like it should be called constructive pedagogy instead of destructive. Disruptive, I
Well,
mean.
well, let's get it. Miko's more of an expert on this than I'll ever be. So tell me where I'm
well,
off the trail.
no, I think we started the conversation saying that disruptive means different things to different people.
Yeah.
When I use an example of disruptive, it's because the fact that you have to get more resources, the fact that you have to provide additional resources, like you have to go on an extraordinary route versus just going through PowerPoint, giving a test. The fact that you have to rethink, that's one of the ways in which I use a disruptive.
I
But
would
I don't go
agree.
any farther than that, because again, this new wave of people, they want to believe in no grades, no assessments, no feedback. They want to teach everything with constructivism. And when people ask me my opinion, I think that that's when it's problematic. Otherwise, I'm very happy with disruption. I think that you have to challenge the learner. I don't think that you can be doing the same things forever. You have to take a risk. That's a phrase that I always tell my team. You, as an instructional designer,
Take
we
the
have
risk.
to take a risk.
That's
Sometimes to win,
excellent.
that's the only way. Sometimes the risk doesn't go well. Sometimes it goes extraordinary, but you always learn something from the risk. So for me, I'm comfortable with that kind of disruption. It's when you try to wipe off everything that we know about cognition, everything that we know about instructional design, just for this new way of saying, oh, I don't believe in those things. We have just to talk about these things. That doesn't work anymore. Who wants to lecture? Everything has to. You're interfering in the way of creativity. When you get to that extreme, is when I think it's dangerous to even talk about disruptive pedagogy in those terms.
Yeah. Well, I think when you look at anything and anything in the world, you've got 10% on top, 10% on the bottom, and the gooey middle is what, 80% or whatever it happens to be. So I think within our field, both instructionals and designers and professors and whatever else it is we do for a living, we've got people on both extremes of this that have their ideas and they're creative and they're smart and they go out and sometimes they make it work just incredibly well. And I think we need to honor that. And whether we call it disruptive or whether we call it apple pie, I don't think makes any difference. But I think if we look for 100% conformity on anything in our field, that we're going to be wasting a lot of really good creative ideas and thoughts. And even people that want to go to the extreme of no grades and just do what they do, I think there's something in there to look at. And what's driving, and that to me is someone who likes to be a detective, I would say, okay, what's driven you to think about doing it this way? What did you see that was a problem, or I mean, I know you don't like the structure of instructional design and all that grade thing is too structured, and we're putting one student against another and all the arguments I've heard over the years. And well, sadly, that's life. I'm graded all the time as a teacher, and okay, maybe I don't like that, but I'm willing to accept that as part of what I do. But I guess my point is, I like to find out what got people to think that that was a better way of doing it. And do they think that's a better way of doing it for every population and every content? And if we're talking about very specific populations, very vertical places and very vertical contents, and maybe that's appropriate for that. I don't know, Miko. Dennise, I mean, pop in here. I'm just flapping, but I'm trying to find a space for everybody to have a success and have a victory in this. And even though I have my views on it from my experience, I don't know if they're universally true.
I guess it would be interesting to
I
find
don't
out why the people who are pushing this feel that way. I agree with you with that, Chuck. It's the analysis part. Why is it hurting people to have grades and have feedback? Is it hindering them against gaining that mastery? Is it causing them anxiety? Maybe there's a realistic reason why maybe there's a whole bunch of data out there that says, yes, people are failing out of these courses because they're scared of that grade or that feedback. I tend to think that's not true, but I'd have to see the data, I guess.
I could tell you from my experience. My undergrad degree is from Antioch University, Yellow Springs, Ohio. Never had a grade.
Really?
Never had a grade in undergrad.
Ah,
Horace Mann was responsible for the philosophy at Antioch, and his whole notion was do something for someone else every day, and that's kind of where that blossomed and grew. So my entire undergrad, I never had a grade. It doesn't mean I wasn't challenged, and all the programs that I participated in were considered mastered level programs because of the work that you had to do. So there was always a tremendous amount of research, and it was a writing program, so everything was, you had to write and write and write and write and write. And then when I became a faculty member at Antioch, for me to get my head around that, it took a little bit. And then middle states came in and said, well, your days not giving grades are probably not going to be what you want them to be. So I came out of that environment for my undergrad, and it worked then. It works in a liberal arts environment for some courses. And I don't know, Miko, if you agree with that or not, but, I could see where that philosophy evolved. And of course, Horace Mann was an incredible thinker and someone who created a great place for people to land on these things. But I don't know.
Let me tell you, learning is very internal. I can be watching TV. I can be on
And
the
learn.
phone with somebody reading the news. I don't need a grade to validate the learning process. Let's be clear. So
Yeah.
I support those who say, you don't need a grade to demonstrate learning. That's completely accurate. The problem is like when you don't give the grade, as I mentioned before, you create these feelings of anxiety in that learner because our education system is not prepared to be gradeless. Like you need a good grade to be into grad school. You need a good grade to be admitted into college, to graduate, to pass, to keep a scholarship. So you're not thinking about the learner if you're not giving the grade. They need that. They need that information. So it's not necessarily if grades are effective or not. Like that's a whole other conversation.
Yep.
It's not meeting a major need for the learner. They need those grades, and they need to know clear information about those grades. I think that's the problem with that disruption when it comes to grades.
Yeah.
Jelaine
And I
has
agree with Jelaine.
yeah, she has a really good point.
And if
Yeah,
you're an
exactly.
instructional designer, you have feedback at least 3 different places. So if you go by Guyanese 9 events, the events where you get feedback are, as we know, 5, 6, and 7. So I call them application feedback. Guyanese had different terms for them. But that had nothing to do with your letter grade. And I don't know how you can have any learning experience without incredible levels of feedback. And I agree completely with you. Letter grade is not, yeah, I agree. And I think it's very subjective if it's defined well. I agree with you there too. And that's what we try to do as designers is we remove subjectivity. And it's one thing that I teach everybody, and Dennise and Miko both as products of my school of thought on this. I don't allow any subjectivity. because I think that's an insult to people. I think they need to know where they are. But the difference is I give them a path. I give them 1,000 chances to get whatever grade is the highest grade, depending on the environment. And this is where designers who really know their stuff, who really know how to work with this, there's never any chance that you will be in doubt about what your grade will be, because you go through the application and feedback at least 3 iterations of that if you do it the way that I teach it. And then you also have a final evaluation, but by the time you get to that final evaluation, you have practiced this at least 3 times, and you should be prepared to go through that very easily because you've already had all the information. So that's where you get the formality part, is that's the system we're stuck in. We're stuck with GPAs, and we are stuck with all of these other things. And yeah, you can't talk about them in isolation. I agree. Miko, thoughts?
Yeah.
Dennise? I'm so glad you're
Well,
on asking questions, Jelaine. If I'm mispronouncing your name, put in the chat how I should pronounce it. It's such a beautiful name.
It is.
But I agree with everything you're saying. Absolutely.
Yeah, the feedback
I
is
think you're saying good things. Yeah.
Go ahead, Miko.
Yeah, the problem with the feedback, as I said, is like with this desire of not getting into the creativity process of the learner, some people into this extreme disruptive pedagogy, they don't want to even give feedback. I honestly think it's not wanting to check the work, but feedback is important. So they're connecting, not giving grades to no feedback. And it's I agree. The grade does not define necessarily the learning, because you can be learning without being graded. But it's something that in our system we still need. So you have to communicate to the students and create a system in which the grade cannot be subjective, because they need that. Maybe what needs to happen is like we need to have a bigger revolution, so to speak. So finally we get rid of grades and stuff like that, if that's what people want. But until then, grades are a need. Students need them. That's a given. For purposes of, again, passing, getting into grad school, to keep on a scholarship. That's the thing. If you tell me that I don't need a grade to do any of the other things, then I get the point. But I need a grade to do these
But
things.
the system is never going to change to that degree. And the part of this, I mean, it reminds me of the conversations I have with the kids. And I've got 3 and Karen's got 2. So we got 5 kids. And we always have this conversation about adulting. Okay, you may not think this is the best thing, but the adult world requires you to have some manifestation of your ability to do certain things. And those happen to be grades, or at least the ability to show that you reach mastery. So if you're going to be a paramedic, you got to do your 2,300 hours or whatever it is, and then you have to take all the clinicals to prove yourself, and then you got to take the exams to get your certification. If you want to be an RN, how many tests do you have to take? If you want to be an MD, how many tests do you take? What do you have to do if you want to be an attorney, or if you want to be an accountant? That's adulting. I'm not going to change that system. It will not change in my lifetime. And if there are other avenues of creativity where these other things can happen, they're terrific. But that's just not the bulk of what we do in life.
Yeah, really good point.
So, Miko, you're smiling. So, you think I'm crazy, or what are you thinking?
No, I think we're on the same page. As I said, I think the thing with gray and disruptive, it's 2 different conversations. People focus on one component without ignoring actually the other. I don't think you can just take a radical posture, because by saying something like no grades, you're creating another problem. Maybe you're solving one, but you're creating another one. And I know firsthand, because again, the students were very anxious, not knowing about any grades or any feedback whatsoever. They came to class over 15 weeks, and they had discussions, conversations, chats, activities, and then at the end they had to submit a bunch of things, a lot of things, and then the day of the grades due, like, they got a grade. That was exactly what happened. And I'm not going to get into more information because I don't want to get in trouble about.
See, that's the beauty of being me, because I don't care what anybody thinks about me at this point. But
I mean, I respect how people want to teach, but
that's exactly the point, right? We can't change the system. It's not about us changing the system. And Jelaine, yep, fosters development, scaffolding mastery, absolutely. I mean, that's what good designers do, is scaffold learning from point of entry to point of exit. novice to expert, whatever we're having to be. And I agree completely. And thanks for being here with us tonight too, by the way, all of you that are jumping in and chatting. But here's the point, right? Instructional designers work with what they got. We're not the people that go out and design these master systems. We're not the people that change the rules. That's not what we do. We take what we got, and with our system, we put together a package to try to deal with it. So if others want to go out and change these systems, that's fine. I don't think you're going to have much success in the short term. You can make incremental change in any system. But right now, the way people get hired, for the most part, at least when you talk about academic programs that get people to degrees, that get people to life choices about what they want to do. I mean, we can argue that endlessly, but that's a system that we are given to work within. I cannot go out and say, Chuck today decided there'll be no more grades and no one has to worry about GPAs.
Exactly.
And that's Chuck's rule. And from here forward, that's the way life is going to be. And I can assure you that no one in my house would even listen to that. Toby, my pup, might, but only
Toby
because Toby would, but
Toby
that's because
would.
I feed Toby. And short of that, so I mean, don't you agree, both of you? I mean, what we do as instructional designers is we take what we're given and we make something out of it.
I mean, I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, I wouldn't want to tackle on changing the system at this point. I want to work within the system that's there right now and make it the best that I can.
Well,
Now,
Mona,
I applaud whoever wants to change the system. There's nothing wrong
yeah.
with that.
Oh,
I
that,
feel that
yeah.
once that happens, that's what happens. Then we can start redesigning things in a different way. But until then, we have to get with the realities and the needs of the learners. Always the needs of the learners.
Well, as I always say, I'll play any game. You just give me the rules and we all play by them. So if somebody changes the rules, okay, then I'll play by those rules and we'll design
Exactly.
great stuff that way. So Mona, thank you. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate you being a regular on
Thank
here.
you.
And how are we doing on time, Dennise? Are we
Well,
getting close?
we're at 1 hour 2 minutes.
Okay, so it's a
Yeah.
perfect time to thank everybody. And I've enjoyed this conversation. I know my internet went down, so it was probably the best part of the whole evening for the
You
rest
missed
of
it.
you.
You missed this really great part of the conversation, but you'll
Yeah,
catch it
I'm
in the
sure I
replay.
did. So that's probably when we had the highest numbers when I was off of here. But Miko, thanks so much for bringing this up as a content, as a topic. This is fascinating to me. And I know we
A
got off on
pleasure. Thank you.
tangents here, but that's kind of what we do here. We go off on tangents, which is what I do when I teach too. I rarely stick to the script because that's so boring. See, I'm being disruptive, right? So it's this whole notion of. So what's our next topic going to be, Miko? What do you think we
Yeah,
should
what are
do
we
from
going to do,
here?
Miko?
I don't know. Maybe people. I mean, if you want me back, ask people what topics we
Yeah,
should maybe.
yeah. So
And yeah,
Mona, Jelaine, and
always
everybody
the
else,
learners.
tell
Yeah.
us what you would like to do. And some med students don't use grades. Yeah, no, I know. I've had, in fact, I have quite a few MDs that have been my students, and we've talked about that a lot with them too. So you're absolutely right. But put in there, put in the chat what you would like to have us discuss. Give us some ideas for content because we're now, I think, over 70, aren't we, Dennise? We're right at 70.
Yes.
So as creative as we are, and with Miko helping us out, and Ashley is always going to help us out too. We got some fun stuff coming up, but we want to try to hit the buttons that everybody's interested in. And I think this is a great topic. So we're going to count on you, Miko, at least once a month to come up with
Oh,
something disruptive so that we
oh
can put
God.
on here. And by the
Yeah,
way, you
people have
look
been
great.
actually.
So, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. I mean, see,
Some people
I don't.
people have been texting me. They want to know about the
Okay.
course. I'm not gonna say it. They want to know about. Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, great is just bad instruction with no support. Yeah, there's just way too much of that out there. Absolutely agree. So there you go, Mona. Thank you. So I'm going to close this off. People don't want us to go over an hour because they're not going to watch it. They get bored. They'll just go up to the point where I fell off the internet and enjoy those few minutes. And then when I came back on, everybody left. So, Miko, thank you so much, my friend. you bring so much to this program and to not only the program but the field of instructional design and all the work that you're doing down there and the little things that nobody knows you do that I know you do to help students and do other things. So thank you so much. We really
appreciate
from me to
it.
you, thank you. And Dennise, of course. Dennise is the brains
Thank
of
you
this
guys for the
show.
invitation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
thank you, Dennise. Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate the invitation. Always a pleasure. I hope to be again soon. Who knows? We'll see.
oh,
Well,
you're
we
going to
hope
be back
so.
at
Yes.
least once a month, or I'll come down and find you because I know where you're at. So, good
Yeah, you
evening to
know.
everybody. If you would please share the fact that this channel exists. I'm not going to get into subscribing and the rest of it because everybody on YouTube does that with clever graphics and the rest of it. I'm not going to do that. But just know that this is not monetized. We don't have a Patreon. This is all on our time and our buck. And we're just trying to make the field better and to bring more people into it and to professionalize it. So if you can spread the word, let people know that we have these videos, that we have these live sessions twice a month, first and third Tuesdays at 6 EDT. Well, we're not even daylight savings now. We're what are we?
I don't know.
Eastern
I think we're
Standard Time.
EDT. I don't know what we are.
Whatever it
We'll
is.
check
It's
on
6
it.
o'clock, 6 o'clock, and wherever we are. So just join us. Thank you so much. We wish you a great Thanksgiving, and we will see you, I hope, next time we go live.
Bye.
See ya.